archaeology here at this university. And this next hour have two purposes. One is to launch our Center of Heritage Research in Cambridge, which we have done heritage research here for a long time, but it feels like a privilege to actually be recognized and have a little bit of resources and have attention towards this very important field. And I therefore have to also thank some people. Very much like to thank Cyprian, who was very instrumental in giving Pasha and I a kick in terms of we should be ambitious and try to go for this.
A gentle prod.
So that was very, very welcome. Then we also want to thank the Resource Committee and Council of School of Humanities and Social Science for providing a big part of the financial support, and the MacDonald Institute for stepping in and providing the rest, so that we can employ a manager. Because the complicated thing is that all your dreams doesn't become anything unless you get someone to help you materializing it or doing it, or you just drown in the administration. So the funding we have been provided will make it possible for us to make it much more visible what we are doing, to enhance the research, to involve the students, and hopefully more than just the ones who do heritage as a specialist, involve them in a range of activity, and through that a range of transferable skills as well. So we are very, very pleased and very excited. And the second part of that is that through this initiative we also formalize our collaboration with a number of other departments within the school. And that is, apart from archaeology, the Faculty of Asian Middle Eastern Studies, the Faculty of Classics, the Institute of Criminology, the Faculty of Education, the Department of Land Economy. 6. So we have 6 partners, and I think from that we will hopefully spread out and involve other people, but we will be able to start to work together, realizing that heritage doesn't belong in one discipline, and from different disciplinary background we can help to enhance our understanding of this growing phenomenon, this phenomena we're becoming aware of as such an important part of society, both in terms of economy, politics, but also in terms of identities. And so we are generally looking forward to this collaboration with partners in the other departments and faculties. So I hereby officially launch the center. We very, very generally look forward to enormous amount of talking. We're good at and should be good at. Secondly, I'm very, very pleased to introduce Professor Helaine Silverman as our speaker for this very first annual lecture for the Center. Helaine is professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Illinois, where she's also the director of CHAMP, which is Collaborative for Cultural Heritage Management and Policy. And that is a collaboration that is dedicated to the critical study of cultural heritage and museums practices around the world. So some ambitions there, I would have to say. Helaine got her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin and worked as an Andean archaeologist until the late 1990s, when her interest started to shift towards heritage. And for the last 20 years or so, she has been very instrumental in pushing the intellectual basis of heritage studies. She's worked on conceptual issues, bringing to attention tensions and contradiction problems between different ways of thinking and engaging with heritage. She brings a very distinct concern with people to her arguments, and then she's always realistic, I would almost say honest, about how people are also part of communities, they're nested within regions, they're affected by states and international aspiration. She never just romanticizes the local. When you read her CV and list of interests, then you will know why we were so keen to get her to come and speak to us. It is quite impressive. Her research interests cover fields such as cultural heritage, cultural politics, cultural governance, cultural rights, anthropology of tourism, memory, identity, nationalism, anthropology of death, and that's just some of it. She writes, my emphasis is on the intersection of local, national, and international heritage management practices with communities under condition of globalization and tourism. Huge, but very important concerns. And in her fieldwork, she had worked in Peru, Southeast Asia, United States, and England, and in the latter, she's particular focus on industrial heritage, and she's very excited about Durham and the hidden industrial heritage in that area. She's also a very busy editor, being the editor of the book series Heritage, Tourism and Communities with Rotlith, and co-editor with Douglas Comer of ICOM's monograph series Multidisciplinary Perspectives in Archaeological Heritage Management, published by Springer. And maybe I should clarify that ICOM is the International Scientific Committee on Archaeological Heritage Management, and they are advisor to ICOMOS and to the World Heritage Committee. So it's work which has some kind of resonance and significance. She's also an expert member of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Archaeological Heritage Management and the International Scientific Committee on Cultural Tourism. And of course sits on several editorial boards, currently including the International Journal of Heritage Studies, which I know at least this part of the audience read a lot of that. She's also a very active communicator, and her various volumes and her articles are of great importance for the advancement of our particular field. She has been enormously prolific. She's been involved with the production of at least 19 volumes, including in 2018, The Heritage of Death, Landscape of Emotion, Memories and Practice. In 2011, and I'm just picking out some examples. 2011, Contested Cultural Heritage, Religion, Nationalism, Erasure and Exclusion in a Global World. And 2007, Cultural Heritage and Human Rights. So, a person with enormous commitment, I would also say enormous integrity, and who have been so very kind to take the time to come and spend a few days with us. So please welcome Helaine as our speaker.
I'm really overwhelmed by that introduction, and I very much appreciate the invitation to be here. Obviously, Cambridge University is renowned, but so too is the work of many of the heritage scholars and archaeologists at this university. And speaking as somebody who did put together a heritage center, the work that Marie-Louise has done to create an official presence is really laudatory, and it's very necessary, and I'm sure that the center under your guidance is going to be productive, recognized, and really do exciting things. And I hope that CHAMP can be part of what you do here. So I very much again appreciate this invitation, and I want to talk to you about a project that I've done, really a situation that I have observed over several years in Cuzco, where I do a lot of my work, that I think is absolutely fascinating, and I hope you will think it's fascinating too. So what I'm talking about is the issue of change in historic urban centers, and this is significant because historic urban centers constitute almost 1/3 of the cultural properties on UNESCO's World Heritage List. The operational guidelines state that these ensembles have been inscribed because of their architectural interest. They contain a large number of ancient buildings of monumental importance, which provide a direct indication of the characteristic features of a town of exceptional interest. And the issue is that there's tremendous variation among these places in terms of their cultural norms, cultural meaning, values, environmental setting, contemporary political context, their economic structure, and so forth. Nevertheless, around the globe, when these originally vernacular lived-in neighborhoods are elevated to the status of landmarked historic urban districts, they typically share a suite of problems, problems that affect the lives of the people who live there. And chief among these problems is UNESCO's expectation that their architectural integrity, built authenticity, and physical urban form will not change. For these are what convey the outstanding universal value that's required for listing. But precisely because these historic urban centers are inhabited, they're subject to change. For instance, by the demands of their residents for various improvements and the needs of the tourism industry. Change removes and adds layers of physical structure and meaning, even while cultural patrimony laws seek to preserve the historic district's fundamental form. The UNESCO operational guidelines, however, do not provide specific prescriptions and proscriptions about the amount and kind of change to be permitted in historic urban centers following their inscription. Thus, as Pendlebury et al. Ironically observed, the urbanness of urban World Heritage sites has opened up a series of problems for World Heritage Site management. These issues have been addressed by a plethora of international declarations, culminating in the 2011 UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape. And excuse me 1 minute, it is really hot. So a persistent goal in these norms is to avoid Disneyfication. In other words, the conversion of the historic city into a veritable temporally constrained theme park with a widely shared set of problems that characterize this process, which produces, in essence, a museumification of the historic centers. So among the various problems that could be cited for this museumification would be conflicting demands of different groups for space, displacement of resident population, loss of traditional lifeways, and especially the loss of a vernacular urban economy. As Harold Williams says, unlike museums, in which the past is there to see but not to touch, historic cities are places in which life continues to be lived, in which cultural heritage is not protected behind barriers, in which it's part of the populated community, making its living and making a life. Historic urban centers are not frozen assets of the past, but rather are a continuous historical process. They have residents, commerce, social networks, and civil and private services that occupy the privileged and coveted space. What's at play for the residents living in these communities, these architecturally noteworthy places, is their social life, identity, sustainability, sense of place, political enfranchisement, and economic equity, which is a very important issue. An emphasis on the lived experience is at the heart of Gustavo Arauz's recent call for inclusion of intangible concepts and social values in heritage management under this new Ecomos paradigm that he phrases as tolerance for change. Arauz recognizes that change is inherent to urban heritage, and he eschews management practice focused primarily on preservation of the physical fabric. Change, well understood and well managed, is the key to the physical survival and social and economic sustainability of urban centers. The historic urban center of Cuzco in the South Highlands of Peru is an ideal research venue for applying these ideas. Its 142 hectares were inscribed on the World Heritage List in 1983 on the basis of the district's extraordinary Inca buildings, the still extant Inca urban layout, and the spectacular Spanish Baroque architecture. A succession of master plans, a municipal code, the national law governing municipalities, and the Constitution itself all impact the management of Cuzco's built heritage, and therefore the population in the historic district and in the larger city that surrounds it. And this is where the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape will come into play. And there has been good and not so good heritage policy and action by a range of actors. A current fight between the Municipality of Cuzco and the Cuzco branch of the Ministry of Culture, which is called the Regional Directorate of Culture, or the DRCC, goes back to the 1980s. So mayors, as you're going to hear me say, have been slugging it out with the ministry now for several decades. The two bodies dispute which national legislation empowers which entity with what powers to care for and intervene in the built cultural patrimony, and what changes can and cannot be enacted in the sanctified zone. The DRCC regards Cuzco as a zona intangible, meaning an untouchable zone over which it professes control. The DRCC is challenged by the municipality, which says it is the entity legally authorized to administer a dynamic, living urban zone. The recurring conflict between the two authorities became unusually bitter when the immediately past mayor, Luis Arturo Flores Garcia, installed a 2-meter-high statue of an Inca king atop the Belle Époque fountain in the center of the Plaza de Armas, and the DRCC vigorously objected. This fight over a lone statue of human size has become a cause célèbre in the annals of heritage management in Peru, and it should receive critical analysis because it raises larger matters concerning heritage management of historic urban centers. Specifically, at what point in time does a UNESCO inscription freeze an urban environment, given that these spaces and their inhabitants do and inevitably must evolve? Where should we draw the line of physical and temporal inalterability? What kinds of physical and functional change should be accommodated in terms of residents' sense of place? How much physical and functional change can a sensitive historic environment withstand before its visually recognizable and ordinarily lived qualities are compromised? Who should be authorizing and monitoring change, and what role should the local residents play in the management and the destiny of these World Heritage properties? Specifically, for Cuzco, what meanings and values does the Plaza hold for Cuzqueños, and which Cuzqueños, thus bringing to bear issues of race, class, education, age, identity, and so forth? I want to interrogate the statute on 3 grounds. First, temporal authenticity, by which I mean that heritage cities are the product of layers of development and habitation. Second, the important local ideological role the statue is intended to fulfill versus legalities of official heritage management policy. And third, visual integrity, which is a topic that's risen to prominence in UNESCO over the past few years. Let's first talk about temporal authenticity. To deal with the Inca on the fountain, we need to view Cuzco not in 1983, when the historic district was inscribed on the World Heritage List as property number 273. Instead, we need to go back to Inca times, when Cuzco was the capital of a great empire that conquered the greater part of Western South America in the 15th century. The pre-Hispanic city gleamed with magnificent stone-walled palaces and temples, and the heart of the city was an enormous plaza that was called Helaine, whose surface was covered with beach sand that had been transported from the distant Pacific shore. Following the defeat of the Incas, the Spanish began to transform Cuzco into a Spanish colonial city, tearing down many Inca buildings and constructing around and on top of others. The Spaniards erected churches, convents, and grand mansions for the powerful members of their society. Among other alterations to the indigenous urban fabric, they reduced the size of Helaine, cutting it in two unequal halves. And this is a drawing by a very famous native author, Felipe Huancampoma de Ayala. It dates to around 1615, and you can see that he's labeling Helaine and Cuzco, and here's the arched colonnade that was constructed, and here you can see it thanks to Google Earth, and it's in Cuzco where the municipal building is located. So, notwithstanding its impressive Spanish occupation, Cuzco's location in the remote Andean highlands led to its marginalization when the capital of the colonial state was established in Lima, which had a superb bay. And what happened is, by even before, but certainly by the time of independence from Spain, Cuzco really was a backwater, and that was 1821. So in the late 19th century, Lima promoted a program of ornato público, or civic embellishment of public space, that changed the urban physiognomy of the city. Ornato público was a Lima-led system of beliefs about progress, culture, public education, and control of urban space. Cuzco's importation of a beautiful cast iron fountain in 1872 can be understood as an assertion by the local Cuzco elite of their pretensions of relevance, connectedness, and development toward the capital in Lima. Elaborate fountains were erected in many of the provincial cities of Peru with a goal similar to Cuzco's. And all fountains of this type had a crowning element of some sort. Remarkably, Cuzco's was a statue in the form of a North American Indian, replete with feathers, bow, arrow, and leggings, elaborated in zinc and painted in vivid colors. The Cuzqueños called it the piel roja, or the red skin, and a common local oral history says that the New York foundry made a mistake, and they understood the request for an Inca as the request for a Native American. Nobody really knows how the statue came to be, but it arrived very soon after the fountain did. In 1911, the Cuzco elite united with their prefect to further enhance the appearance of the plaza, putting in 8-meter-wide cement sidewalks with drainage, 100 wrought iron benches, 4 ornamental gaslight posts, and gardens. And these replaced the unadorned bare surface that had existed since Inca times. Just as the arrival of the French-style fountain 4 decades earlier had asserted the participation of Cuzco on the national stage, so the Cuzqueños now contended that their rehabilitation of the Plaza de Armas was going to facilitate the engagement of the city in international culture. They self-identified as, quote, sellers or sowers of progress, and they perceived the refurbishment of the plaza as evidence of the inclusion of Cuzco among, quote, the most civilized of the continent. Cuzqueños praised the cleanliness, paving, and adornment of the Plaza de Armas, which corrected its previous, quote, unsanitary condition, which it was, and also this idea of it being a space that is sano, that is healthy. This has very specific cultural connotations, historic connotations, race connotations. This is rehabilitation that has a much more significant meaning than let's just make the plaza pretty. And in fact, they regarded it as a moralizing lesson. And this is where the concept of sano comes in, of healthy. This is a moral enterprise that they've undertaken. And Cuzco indeed was filthy at that time. A very different opinion of the plaza, however, was expressed at that exact moment and by coincidence by José de la Riva Agüero, a visiting member of the highest echelon of Lima society. He wrote that, quote, Cuzco is the heart and symbol of Peru, and because the immense plaza had been the theater of many notable sufferings, the modern garden is ridiculous and bourgeois, end quote. Inexplicably, Riva Agüero said nothing about the Belle Époque fountain with its piel roja, even though it appears in his photo, nor do any of the documents at this time reference it. Significantly, Riva Agüero's criticism of the plaza resonates with the current debate that's happening 100 years after his visit. And this brings us to the issue of ideology and legality. The Cuzqueños lived happily with their incongruous piel roja for decades, or at least there was no indication to the contrary, until it was pulled down in 1969 by two miscreants, and it wasn't replaced until now. On June 24th, 2011, in honor of Inti Raymi, the recreated Inca Festival of the Sun, the mayor unveiled a gift to Cuzco. Over the Belle Époque fountain, he had erected in temporary materials this ushnu, this Inca platform. And on top of the platform, he put this golden statue of an Inca, so the fountain was hidden. Now, you would think this is pretty innocuous, given that this is a really big celebration in Cuzco, but it became the basis of the fight between the municipality and the DRCC. What the mayor said was this, and I quote him, "This is the site of the Inca. Here our Inca should be. We studied history to recover part of our identity. Everything grandiose that we've inherited is here amongst us, the great architectural complexes, part of tangible and intangible culture. And this is why our emperor should be here, in the great plaza, where we can all render appropriate homage to him," unquote. Symbolically and ideologically, the installation of an Inca in the Plaza de Armas compensates for the heavy weight of the cathedral and the Jesuit church and the rest of the colonial assemblage in this space. For it's only with knowledge and keen eyesight that you can look out from the center of the plaza and actually see remaining Inca walls. The new statue of the Inca reminds the viewer that the Plaza de Armas was Haucaipata. Even though the DRCC believed, quite rightly, that this was going to be taken down, they were upset immediately. They protested the temporary installation. And in their first round of written complaints, the DRCC said, "The Plaza de Armas lies within the delimitation of the nationally declared monumental urban environment, and thus was protected by the general law of the cultural patrimony of the nation." The DRCC opined that there could not be, quote, "impulsive or enthusiastic interventions of the moment, because the plaza is a premier public space whose physiognomy and the elements that comprise it possess an urbanistic value as an assemblage, and this space is part of a historic monument," unquote. The DRCC expressed itself sociologically, saying, quote, "The historical and social processes that mold the physiognomy of the cities. Their streets, their spaces are very complex and generate associations of the collective memory over various generations that must be considered when changes are proposed, especially in iconic, symbolic, and emblematic places as is precisely the Great Plaza, unquote. The DRCC said that it respectfully requested the removal of the Ushnu and the statue, reminding the municipality with a slight threat that it was necessary to comply with the law. However, there is a legal ambiguity in Peru's heritage legislation. The Constitution says that the state is the owner of all archaeological and historic remains that are expressly declared the cultural patrimony of the nation. But the 2003 organic law governing municipalities empowers city governments with the care of movable and immovable goods in public use that are functioning as local public services, and it specifically refers to historic, cultural, and landscape patrimony. The 2003 law also says that the municipalities should promote civic culture, and it refers to local beautification, or not the locale, so this is resonating with what they were doing decades earlier. And it refers to really this idea of how the Cuzco elite refurbished their plaza. And so this organic law governing municipalities would seek to give the municipality authority over the open space of the Plaza de Armas. But a 2010 law says that the Ministry of Culture, representing Cuzco by the DRCC, has exclusive and excluding rights to manage Peru's cultural heritage on behalf of the state. So, workers from the municipality diligently, as promised, removed the Ushnu, the platform, when the Inti Raymi festival concluded. This is when the preliminary dispute between the DRCC and the municipality exploded, because now everybody realized the statue had been made of bronze and it was soldiered to the top of the fountain, and that the mayor intended for it to remain. In its second round of complaints, the DRCC emphatically affirmed that its office, not the municipality, has the sole constitutional right to manage the cultural patrimony of Cuzco. Moreover, the DRCC complained that the mayor hadn't consulted it, and thus he had exceeded his administrative power. The DRCC claimed that the statue was a grave attack on the cultural patrimony of Cuzco that irreparably altered the harmonious historic ensemble of the plaza recognized by UNESCO. Indeed, the DRCC worried that the statue could result in a negative observation by UNESCO because the plaza is a key element in the World Heritage inscription. And in their interpretation, not just national laws, but all of the UNESCO instruments would say that you cannot intervene in that space, anything classified as cultural heritage. And so they opened up a lawsuit against the mayor. They threatened to have him sent to jail, and they demanded that the offending statue be removed. And my joke is always that when UNESCO sneezes, Cuzco catches pneumonia. They are obsessed. I cannot tell you how many times over these decades that I've been there, a front page will say, Cuzco could lose its World Heritage status. They're very worried. Now, for his part, the mayor, ni tonto ni perezoso, the mayor defended the legitimacy of his action. He indicated that the nomination dossier of Cuzco approved by UNESCO stated, quote, the municipality is responsible to authorize interventions in the city and to participate in the preservation and restoration of the cultural patrimony, unquote. So demonstrating the legality of his actions, what the mayor did was he put up these poster boards on either side of the fountain with the Inca showing the original piel roja, and that the Inca was merely this reinstallation, una reposición del Inca, in other words, correcting the original iconographic error, so that this now was really giving to Cuzco the identity that it had and that it should have, and that was always present in Cuzco's popular culture. In fact, he said even international tourism contributed to the construction of that identity. And in this regard, I'm reminded of an approach that Neil Silverman, with a B, has advocated. He argues that judicious, factually grounded reconstruction can be a valuable tool for reconnecting residents with the distinctive character of the place they live in, a form of heritage placemaking that facilitates understanding and enjoyment of the traditional spirit of the place. Clearly, this is what the mayor was attempting to do. Although the DRCC cited UNESCO, it actually had not consulted that organization. So it was an elated and euphoric Mayor Flores who returned to Cuzco on December 9th, 2013 from a trip to Mexico, at which he had met with Nuria Sanz, who was in charge of the Latin American Cultural Sector Division of UNESCO, that which would be concerned with the Latin American cultural heritage. And she said that the Inca statue was not an attack on Cuzco's cultural patrimony. Upon learning of Dr. Sanz's statement, the director of the DRCC retorted that Sanz had only been expressing her own opinion and that UNESCO in Paris had not emitted an official statement. Actually, this is because UNESCO has refused to become involved in the dispute, regarding it as a local political matter, which further supports the mayor's position. Moreover, and in accordance with what Dr. Sanz said, the UNESCO State of Conservation reports for 2011 and 2013 do not mention the statue. They are concerned quite legitimately with the destruction of Inca walls by a shopping center and a hotel in the heart of the historic center. Soon after his return from Mexico, the mayor installed a new plaque in the Plaza de Armas alongside the existing one that commemorates various honorific titles of Cuzco that culminate with the 1983 designation as World Heritage. So here's the original plaque, and it has all these dated laudatory names, nominations, designations of Cuzco, and here's the new plaque, and here it is enlarged, and here's what it says, because the wording is really interesting, because it makes a direct reference to the Inca statue, which also you can see right here on this drawing of this plaza. Here's what it says. To the city, cradle of Latin American culture, historic capital of Peru, Inca Andean bastion and national pride. On the 30th anniversary of the UNESCO recognition as World Cultural Heritage, we ratify our commitment to conservation, preservation, and revitalization on the road to development with identity. There is no reason to choose between safeguarding patrimony on the one hand and development of cities on the other. True protection is that which permits patrimony to continue to live, adapting itself to the changes of its times so as to be the authentic testimony of a culture. Signed, Irina Bokova, Director General of UNESCO, and Luis Flores Garcia, Mayor of Cuzco, December 9, 2013. Irina Bokova's signature on this plaque certainly would seem to support the mayor's position and bolster what Nuria Sanz had said, if indeed Mrs. Bokova actually gave her approval for the text, which is unlikely, because UNESCO Director Generals only sign these major UNESCO instruments and the certificates that sites put up in their office that says you're a World Heritage Site. So what is Interesting, though, about this is the narrative that the mayor is telling, which actually corresponds to what Gustavo Arauz is promoting as the new tolerance for change mantra of Icamos, this tolerance for change that cities cannot be frozen. The next issue I want to address is visuality. Visual integrity and visual impact have become important issues in the management of built environments. Discussions have focused on architecturally volumetric and excessively high new buildings erected inside inscribed historic properties or in their buffer zones. The kinds of buildings being condemned for their visual impact on heritage zones are highly visible and do not thematically reference the historic districts in or near which they're located. This is a very obvious example. So what about the Inca on the statue? What about the Inca on the fountain, which again has human proportions? It's a single statue in the middle of the plaza, and it recalls the historic significance of its context. The statue isn't even always visible from within the plaza or from outside the plaza. It really depends on where you're standing. So its view shed is actually limited. In assessing the views toward the Inca statue, it's worthwhile to make a comparison with the Fuseaux of Paris, which are the zones of visibility whose sightlines along the banks of the Seine River are protected by the French state and inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List. Within one of the Fuseaux is the Louvre, a registered historical monument. Although the interior patio is not visible from the river and thus is outside the Fuseaux, we should recall the acrimonious debate over the massive glass pyramid installed by architect I.M. Pei in that historic place. If the French, living in the city that headquarters UNESCO, permitted this architecturally discordant structure to be built in one of their most important public, historic, and symbolic spaces, then why should the reinstallation of a statue, in this case a statue of an Inca, cause such hysteria in Cuzco? The answer is because the statue is a vehicle for the decades-old fight for cultural administrative supremacy between the Ministry of Culture and the municipality, as I've indicated. But that's just a turf war. What's globally significant is what enables this local conflict. The dispute is enabled by the official heritage gaze, and this gaze is the fundamental flaw in much urban heritage management. This official gaze is evident in the hierarchical categorizations of buildings prepared by national heritage institutions around the world. And here you have two examples. One you're familiar with from your own country, and here's another one from Luang Prabang. And what I'm showing are these different grades or categories of buildings and what should be protected and not protected and how they're treated. Whether of UNESCO or a national heritage agency, the official heritage gaze is a leapfrog gaze that jumps over the urban landscape from monument to monument, privileging some features and ignoring others. The weakness of the leapfrog gaze is that it ignores what happens in the physical, discursive, and intangible spaces between these ancient historical buildings. Between is where contemporary life happens, embodied in its residents, the living actors who reside in historic urban centers, and that contemporary life is as authentic as the cherished built environment. Moreover, the leapfrog gaze is not only spatial, it's temporal. Speaking of urban heritage environments, Ana Pereira Roders asks what has been lost,
demolished, decreased, maintained, or added that enhances the attributes that accompany significance. At issue is a judgment about the spirit of place as a living entity from the past, in the present, and for the future. Let's contemplate this question. What would have happened if the Piel Roja still had been standing when Cuzco's nomination dossier was presented to UNESCO? Would UNESCO have rejected the nomination because of the Piel Roja, bearing in mind that the fountain had always had this erroneous crowning element and that the style of the fountain itself is incongruous with the qualities for which Cuzco was proposed for World Heritage status? The operational guidelines do not prohibit the simultaneous presence of later structures already in existence at the time of inscriptions, even though they're not part of the OUV, and Cuzco actually fulfills these conditions. The DRCC position is that the existence of the Piel Roja before 1969 is irrelevant to the mayor's reinstallation of the new Inca statue because the Piel Roja was taken down 3 years before the World Heritage Convention was created, 13 years before Peru ratified the World Heritage Convention, and 14 years before the historic district of Cuzco was inscribed on the World Heritage List. The DRCC's argument negates the possibility of change in a living World Heritage site at the same time that it ignores the criteria under which the historic district of Cuzco was inscribed. Does the statue impair the authenticity, integrity, and unique testimony to the ancient civilization that existed there, criterion 3, or the architectural ensemble illustrating a significant stage in human history, criterion 4? No, it does not. Should delisting be demanded by the World Heritage Committee if the statue isn't removed? No, both the statue and the designation should remain. Indeed, I would argue that the statue contributes to the aura, the placefulness, the genius loci of the Plaza. It contributes to what Michael Passett has called a feeling value. It is, in fact, the expression of Cuzco's postmodern zeitgeist, which is deeply imbricated in globalization and tourism, and where conservatively defined authenticity in the built environment is not the principal frame of reference for local people's construction of a meaningful social life. Quoting Nigel Walter, "The built environment is more than a backdrop against which we act out our lives, but is itself an active partner in our self-composition." The Belle Époque fountain has long been a pivot of the Plaza, and the new Inca statue is rapidly becoming an element of the popular culture of Cuzco and Cuzco's intangible cultural heritage, as seen in the habitual practices of Cuzco's residents as well as the tourists. Elderly Cuzqueños look at it and they recall the Piel Roja of their youth. For younger Cuzqueños, the Inca is fast becoming part of their own landscape of memory. Thus, not only is the DRCC at odds with the municipality, it's at odds with the vernacular construction of heritage in Cuzco, by which I mean how ordinary Cuzqueños think about their identity and what's culturally meaningful in their lives and their daily practice, as well as during ritually occasioned performances of heritage like Inti Raymi. Conclusion. Sherman Burke has correctly observed, heritage significance is a dynamic and diverse social construct. This necessarily implicates the paradigm of values-based heritage management. Clearly, the Plaza and the historic district overall have a different value for Cuzco residents than for UNESCO and the DRCC. The Plaza de Armas is, in fact, the locus of conflicting values between the heritage elite representing themselves and the international heritage order and the municipality, which represents the populace. Moreover, not only do different stakeholders hold different values, they hold different values simultaneously. And as Gustavo Araoz reminds us, the values attributed to a heritage place evolve in respect to time and space. The symbolic attributes embedded in a historic urban fabric do not end in the era in which it was constructed. That built environment is produced and reproduced and reinterpreted time and time again. The DRCC presents the statue of the Inca as a negative and foreign element, damaging the collective memory that Cuzqueños have of their plaza. The municipality presents the statue as a positive stimulus for the construction of memory. Both sides coincide in saying that the statue affects the sensory perception of the plaza. At issue in both positions is what the object is supposed to communicate, having become, in this fight, the synecdoche for the entire historic district with repercussions beyond the present. The Plaza de Armas has always materialized the essence of the evolution of Cuzco's society. It's a venue of social life, a frame for contemporary political discussions, a component of Cuzqueño identity, an anchor for memory, a source of income for some, and a repository for all the political, social, cultural, and economic history in Cuzco that's played out over hundreds of years. Again, applying Nigel Walter, the plaza is a story that has not reached its conclusion, nor will it ever. The Inca statue atop the fountain will celebrate its 7th anniversary next month. It incarnates and instantiates an evolving intangible cultural heritage in Cuzco. The fundamental issue that I've addressed in this paper concerns tolerance for change in a historic urban zone that's declared untouchable by virtue of being national heritage and ultimately world heritage. I've used the drama of the statue as a point of departure for interrogating attitudes and policies toward change in the public space of historic urban centers under international, national, and local heritage regimes. I've argued that heritage discourse impacts the real lived world of the Cuzqueños, and that the heritage discourse in Cuzco expresses different value systems. The authorized heritage discourse of the DRCC, the alternative heritage discourse of the municipality directed at the population, and beyond the scope of this talk, there's the counter-heritage, in Dennis Burns' sense, that's performed in the vernacular domains of daily practice in Cuzco. I've argued that an official, narrow view of international heritage management is wont to ignore the vernacular production of heritage and local ideas about authenticity. I've advocated a realistic, rather than rarefied approach to heritage management in historic urban centers. Such an approach will enhance public appreciation of heritage by making it accessible and relevant in daily life. Recognition and acceptance of the inevitability of social as well as physical change in these special built environments productively challenges administratively conservative regulations that seek to freeze the built environment, which is, after all, the lived world of residents, and this is where their life takes place. Residents are, and they should be, active participants in these processes. Thank you.
So I hope you will have seen with that beautiful display of all the variability of heritage that takes us from the territoriality of our partners in land economy, the materiality of our own work, the legality issues, the issues of authenticity, and of course of age, appropriation of public space, all the different issues that in our various partners within the heritage sector are beautifully displayed here in Helaine Silverman's talk. One of the things that she has shown so clearly is, I don't think I need to convince anyone in this room that sense of heritage as being a taken for granted, stable anchor that we can both all relate to as something that will fix us nice and neatly and passively and peacefully, and no issues around it is completely a myth and a false. And how much it's really all about instability rather than stability, about contestation and debate and tensions and competitions over various things rather than taken for granted stability and frozen bit of time that we can all relate to. So it's done that beautifully, and all the issues around temporality, the authenticity of temporality, that change and mobility within heritage, that constantly changing thing that means that heritage is always changing, always being created, always new, and therefore so difficult to actually capture, though we try to with our picture postcard images of it. Thank you so much for that. And I think it also shows this kind of heritage being a history as it should be, according to some, the kind of projection of history into the past and saying this is our heritage, this is the monumentalizing history through that. I think it's also shown very well how central heritage is to today's world of post-truth and alternative histories, in which identity politics is taking over and everybody's constructing their own versions of history, heritage, and identity in order to gain that political jostling and to gain that power legitimacy, and how heritage is often used in kind of as a proxy war for other things that are going on. So thank you so much for that. Now, one of the things that Helaine so well described is the sense of the local community as being lots of voices, not speaking with one voice. And so that resulting, we don't speak with one voice here either in the Academy, obviously. So I'd like to invite you to celebrate the resulting cacophony of voices with a glass of bubbly at the McDonald Institute to help us celebrate the launch of this that has been done so lovely well for us. Thank you so much.